Hello and happy Wax on Wednesdays. We've done a lot of collage and encaustic in the past. On Wax on Wednesdays, we've done all sorts of different takes on collage and encaustic. It's a really fun process. It lends itself to any style. And so I try to do something a little bit different every time, just to give you an idea of what's out there and what's possible with encaustic and collage. So today I'm using some gouache, and I'm also using my favorite practice substrate, which is those ceramic tiles, those 4x4 ceramic tiles that you can get in the hardware store. And I've adhered for encaustic we need both a rigid and a porous substrate. So the tile is providing a rigid support, and the watercolor paper, I've adhered Arches watercolor paper with some archival bookbinders glued to the tiles, and then just sanded the edges down, and that's providing the absorbent part of our support for the encaustic. And that encaustic is going to absorb right into that watercolor paper, and it really makes a great little support, especially for these little practice pieces. And this project is fun in so many different ways. There's so many aspects to this little exercise. The first one is just exploring color and just having fun with it. And I love painting with gouache. I love the vibrancy of the gouache. This happens to be a Winsor Newton gouache that I'm using today, but I like several brands of gouache. And if you ever want to see the supplies that I'm using every week in these videos, then there's always a full blog post for each video on ShariReplogle.com, including the supplies that I used that week. So if you're curious as to exactly what I used in each video, then always check out the link below the video, and it will have the link to the blog post for that week. And I'm working on several different pieces at one time, and I like to have these all done up beforehand. So a lot of times I'll do this, the last thing I do before I leave the studio is to adhere some watercolor paper to these tiles and let them, set something on top of them and let them dry overnight. And that way when I come back in the morning, when you come back into your creative space, they're all ready to go for you, and they're ready to paint. So that's kind of fun to just get a whole bunch of substrates prepped and ready, and have a bunch of them ready to go to start creating when you come into your creative space. And these are so fun it's fun to do these for a week. I love to do this exercise, this warm-up exercise, do the same thing for a week and see all the different colors that you explore each day, and then compare them at the end of the week. How were your colors, your color palette at the beginning of the week versus the end of the week? What affected your colors? Did the weather affect it? It's fun to explore the colors that you select on a rainy day versus a sunny day. And it might not be a huge variation. You might have a pretty steady palette or a go-to palette that you love, your favorite colors, but a lot of times it is fun to see that your hues change just a little bit. You have just a little bit of change in that color or that palette that you choose, and it's fun to see and to compare, especially if you do the same warm-up exercise every day for a week and see how it evolved over that week. And this is my favorite part of this exercise, and it's why I call it the collage doodles. But I'm using each little blotch of color of that gouache to create illustrative marks and with different media. So right now I'm still using gouache with a liner brush, but there's all sorts of media that you can use to make marks in these colors with India inks and liner pens and uniball pens, graphite, charcoal. There's all sorts of different things that you can use to create fun marks and pattern on these colors. And it's fun to, again, my marks tend to be really sort of, I look to nature for a lot of my pattern making. They're really organic, but I'm painting really quickly and intuitively and just really going with the flow. So if your patterns are more geometric, it's fun to see how they evolve over the week. What do you come up with if you do this every single day for a week, what sort of patterns evolve over that week and what do you come up with? And I think that you're delightfully surprised at what you will come up with if you do this exercise every day for say a week and see what patterns sort of evolve. And it's relaxing. It's about discovery and about exploring and having fun. So I did 3 of these tiles all together, and now I'm going to add some encaustic, some clear encaustic medium to these with a natural brush, and then fuse that wax into the watercolor paper with the heat gun. And whenever I'm using paper, I always use the heat gun instead of the torch. I'd rather have the heat gun and be careful than have a live flame when working with raw paper. And another little tip when working with these tiles is they're ceramic tiles, so if you warm them up a little bit with the heat gun first, it really gets rid of those air bubbles quickly. There's almost no air bubbles when you go to add your encaustic medium by simply just warming it up a little bit with your heat gun before adding the encaustic medium. And that ceramic tile really absorbs that heat, so it's really good for that purpose. Now here I've used just an old magazine from the 1920s, and this ended up being, I used an actual illustration from that magazine because it had such wonderful gray tones in it, and that's what I wanted for these stones. So you can see that the top stone has actually the signature from the artist that did the illustration. I thought that was kind of fun in the story in the magazine. So this, of course, every time I add them, I'm fusing them. I add another layer of wax and fuse it in there, and it's so wonderful to see how different papers absorb that encaustic medium. So every time you add a different sort of paper, it absorbs the wax differently, and it's super fun with vintage papers to do this. I love using vintage papers. And I'm burnishing everything down with my Catalyst Wedge number 6, and my substrate is already warm, so it's really easy to kind of burnish it down first, and that way it doesn't move when I go and brush on more encaustic medium. My papers aren't moving around and dislodging before I go ahead and add that. On this next piece, I'm adding a poem verse from that same magazine, and this is a little larger piece, so I'm going to make sure that after I add the wax, I'm going to go back over it with Catalyst Wedge number 6 and make sure that there's no air bubbles in that piece. And it's just a little bit larger and it can get some bubbles, so it's always good that Catalyst Wedge number 6 has a little bit of give to it, so it's not as likely to tear your paper. It's not, it's like kind of a rubber spatula. It has a little softness to it, so a little give to it, so it's not so rigid that it will just tear right through the paper. So that's why I love using that wedge to get any air bubbles out and really make sure that that is on there really well. And you can use this to scrape some of the excess wax off as well. It's rigid enough that it will do that as well when the wax is still warm. But it's a really great tool all around for collage for making sure that there's no air bubbles and that it's really adhered well to your substrate. And when these little pieces are done, they shine up brilliantly with just a pair of pantyhose from the dollar store. And they're 4x4, so they maybe a minute, and they'll get a lacquer-like shine. And that's the great thing about Encaustic, is that it's its own finish. And not only that, but you can keep it matte or you can have it gloss. And these little pieces buff up in less than a minute. They are to a lacquer-like shine with these pantyhose, and you can keep it this gloss, or you can let it go back matte. After a while it'll go back to a matte finish, and so you have a choice of what you want with Encaustic. And here I'm just adding a little bit of India ink. I always add the India ink as my very last step and fuse it in when I'm done, just very gently. And just another little layer here of mark making to your collage to sort of tie it all together. And if you'd like to dive in and explore more about Encaustic and collage, you can always join us in Encausticology Collage Journey online workshop. It's available on ShariReplogle.com. You can have lifetime access and dive in whenever you like to any of the Encausticology classes on ShariReplogle.com. So I hope you really enjoyed and have fun with this little collage doodle exercise, and we will see you next week. Happy Wax on Wednesdays!